bless everybody. This is Pastor Kelvin coming to you from the King's Worship Center right here in the wonderful city of Simpsonville, South Carolina. I'm looking forward for you stopping through and visiting us real soon. I want to talk to you for a few moments from the thought, pivot. Pivot. It is important to understand that sometimes the best laid plans don't work, but oftentimes the reason why plans fail is because when things happen, we are not prepared to change course or direction. Oftentimes we think that if we have to adjust course or adjust direction, that we are failing to walk out the vision. Well, obviously that is not the truth. Why is that not the truth? In 1 Samuel, we find King Saul, who was a man that was chosen by his people, but allowed by God. Listen to that, chosen by the people, but allowed by God. And he was allowed the opportunity to rule over God's people, even though he was not necessarily God's choice or God's choosing in the moment. He allowed the people to make a selection. So in that selection, what we find is that Saul made a mistake, and God was able to discern in that mistake that his heart was not really with him. So when we look at the 14th verse, God says, listen, you failed to do what I've asked you to do. So the Lord your God has sought out, meaning the Lord pivoted. The Lord had already prepared to make a selection in the case of this guy making a mistake. Not that God didn't give him a chance or an opportunity, but because what he had done was so grossly neglectful of God's will, God could not continue with this person in place. So even though the Lord pivoted, he didn't change. Y'all listen to this. So just because you have to pivot in the moment doesn't mean your vision is changing. It means you're altering certain things to ensure that you can keep going. There are three things I want you to realize that are necessary when it's time to pivot. The first thing that you want to realize when it's time to pivot, if that anything or any person within your vision, you discover that their heart is not pure and that their intentions are corrupt, you need to pivot. Because I work in the marketplace and outside of the marketplace, I often have learned that, there are people that I have grown accustomed to having on the team. There are people that I genuinely love. But when I discover that their heart is not pure towards the vision, I have to pivot. Keeping them in place because I love them or I'm fond of them or I'm used to them being there is not an excuse to keep someone where they no longer belong, especially if their heart is not after vision. You got to understand this. You can't be afraid to pivot. Most of us won't do this because we're afraid of hurting feelings. We're afraid of change. We don't want to let go. We've grown accustomed to who they are. But listen, when you find out hearts are not pure and intentions are impure, you've got to pivot. The next thing you've got to realize when it's time to pivot, if it's going to preserve the vision. So whatever changes need to be made to preserve the vision, you've got to pivot. And when we say pivot, all we're talking about is a change or an altering of direction or instruction or plans to ensure that the central goal is not compromised. What is it that you have in place? What is the thing that the end result, the end goal that God has given you? And he's told you how it's going to end up. He's told you how you should get there. But there may come a time where you have to pivot when you find out intentions aren't pure, when you find out hearts aren't pure, when you find out people really aren't with you. You've got to pivot. When it comes to ensuring that the vision is preserved, you've got to pivot. If it requires making changes, if it requires putting new things in place, if it requires bringing people in, if it requires you moving out of the way, whatever is required to preserve the vision, that is when you know it's time to pivot. But thirdly and lastly, what I want to share with you is when it's time to pivot, if it's going to preserve your character or your life, preservation of your character or your life. Let's look at Moses. Moses should have gotten over to the promised land, but because he allowed the people he was leading to make him angry, he didn't follow God's instruction. So he did not hollow God in front of the people because the people caused him to get out of character, causing him to do the opposite of what God wanted and what God said. So Moses got to see, but he didn't get to enjoy because his character was compromised because of the people. Listen, Saul was not able to remain in position. The Bible says he could have had the kingdom for generations, but Saul's character was not preserved. When you find your character being challenged or put in compromising positions, you got to pivot. If that means you've got to be a Joseph and you've got to run from Potiphar's wife, then you had better pivot. If you find out it's going to put your life in jeopardy, your character, who you are, your name, your credibility, you've got to pivot. Is simple gratification, quick money, or whatever it is that's quick in the moment worth you compromising your character and forfeiting the vision? So if those things are coming your way, you need to pivot. Listen, thank you for spending this time with me this morning. Till we see you again next time. Peace abide.